is cooperating. A white Christmas for much of the Northeast and Midwest has given way to bitter cold expected to last until the new year. There's a disagreement in the aviation industry right now about whether a shortage of commercial pilots really exists. But there is no doubt that as baby boomers get older, many pilots will be retiring and the profession will need replacements. Here's correspondent Alicia Acuna.
So I always knew I wanted to be a pilot, so it was just kind of a luck of the draw kind of thing.
Scott Frank's love of flying could not have been better timed. The recent graduate from the aviation school at Metro State University, Denver, is entering an industry in desperate need of commercial pilots.
There are restrictions, if you will, in terms of how many pilots there are, but it hasn't really hit home yet. The real hit's going to be in the next 3 to 5 years. According
to Boeing, in the next 2 decades, the industry will need 117,000 new commercial pilots in North America and 637,000 worldwide.
Yes, there is a pilot shortage.
Now, major carriers are following the lead of regionals and starting to fill the pipeline at the collegiate level.
Having a promise while you're still in the academic environment is priceless compared to how it used to work.
Aspiring commercial pilots used to come up through the military or regional airlines. Now places like MSU's Worldwide Indoor Airport train students who are actively being recruited by major carriers. Frank is headed for an internship with United, which if all goes well, he will never leave.
I can pretty much skip that regional area and just go straight to United.
The Airline Pilots Association International insists there is no shortage and says some airlines got themselves into this situation.
And some of the other ultra low-cost carriers who don't keep up with wages, benefits, and work-life balance issues that you might see more accepting conditions at the large global carriers.
Regional airlines have already been forced to increase pay and offer signing bonuses, which is something that was unheard of 10 years ago. Now those same small regionals are going to have additional competition from the big carriers, which are dipping into those same colleges. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
Alicia Acuna reporting from Denver. The longest-serving Republican senator in U.S. history is getting a not-so-friendly push out the door tonight. Utah's largest newspaper is calling for Orrin Hatch to retire at the end of his current term. Correspondent Ellison Barber tells us why and how Hatch is reacting.
A Christmas Day tweet from Utah Senator Orrin Hatch with a photo of the Salt Lake Tribune showing Hatch as Utahn of the Year. The tweet said, quote, "Grateful for this great Christmas honor from the Salt Lake Tribune." It's a label the Salt Lake Tribune says has, quote, "everything to do with recognizing his utter lack of integrity that rises from his unquenchable thirst for power."
I've come to Utah to take a very historic action.
The paper criticized Hatch for his role in shrinking the size of 2 national monuments in Utah, calling the move anti-environmental, anti-Native American, and anti-business. The Tribune's editorial writers added it's time for Hatch to go. After all, they say he did what he said he always wanted to do. Tax reform, adding, Hatch, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, has his fingerprints all over it. Perhaps the most significant move of Hatch's career is the one that should, if there is any justice, end it. Hatch didn't mention any of that on Twitter. The senator's spokesperson said the tweet was sarcastic and in a statement added, "We all sincerely hope the members of the Salt Lake Tribune editorial board find joy this holiday season in something beyond baselessly attacking the service and integrity of someone who's given 40 years for the people of Utah just to satisfy their unquenchable thirst for clicks."
Senator Hatch, will you run again? You considering running again?
In early December, President Trump visited Utah.
Thank you to a very special man, Orrin Hatch, for the introduction. He's a fighter. We hope you will continue to serve your state and your country in the Senate for a very long time to come.
Less than 2 weeks later, Hatch talked about his future on Special Report.
Well, I've said that I intend to run again. I'll probably announce this sometime after the first of the year as to just exactly what I'm going to do.
Waiting in the wings is former Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney and his reported interest in running for Hatch's seat, a prospect the senator would embrace.
You think Mitt Romney has a political future?
Well, I sure do. And, you know, if I didn't run, I would love to see him run in my place. And it would be good wherever he serves because he's a straight shooter, a really wonderful fellow.
Someone who would be less than enthusiastic about Mitt Romney in the Senate is probably President Trump. Romney has criticized Trump for supporting Roy Moore and blasted the president's response to Charlottesville. Mike?
A topic we will cover with the panel. Ellison Barber here in Washington. Ellison, thanks a lot. Tomorrow is the day a tied state House race in Virginia is supposed to be decided by a drawing. Local reports say the Democratic candidate is preparing a lawsuit to stop the action. If the Democrat wins the election, the state House will have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. If the GOP candidate wins, Republicans will maintain control. Up next, parents of public school students in California prepare for some big changes in what your kids are taught. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 32 in Chicago, as Christmas-time carnage sees 5 men killed and at least 20 other people wounded in holiday weekend shootings. The city's in the midst of a multi-year epidemic of gun violence. Last Christmas season, 59 people were shot and 11 killed. Fox 35 in Orlando, as Disney officials closed the Magic Kingdom for a short time on Christmas Day because the park reached capacity. Other parks, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and Animal Kingdom, were not affected. And this is a live look at New York from Fox 5. One of the big stories there tonight, city officials plan a crackdown on electric bicycles in the new year. The bikes are a favorite of restaurant delivery workers, but many pedestrians complain about often dangerous driving. The bikes are illegal to operate on city streets. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
My weekly poker game is moving to the Cobra Lounge. You'll help run it.
Thank you, Molly.
You're making thousands in tips every week. I'm gonna stop paying you. As my assistant, it doesn't seem fair.
It doesn't seem...
When dealing with historical figures. From Los Angeles tonight, national correspondent William Lajeunesse on a hugely controversial decision.
Welcome to elementary school, where in California the law requires a fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful treatment of lesbian, gay, bi, and transsexual Americans.
I think what's going on here is an effort to politicize history.
We're not trying to make anybody gay. We're not saying there's an agenda. We're not saying that these people are better than other people. All we're saying is this is another group of Americans, and they face certain prejudices.
The state required publishers like Mark Jarrett to include the sexual preferences of prominent historical figures, among others, activist Jane Addams, writers Emily Dickinson and Nathaniel Hawthorne, and President James Buchanan, though evidence is inconclusive.
I think we should say Buchanan, he never married. He had a very good friend who was living with him. He may have been gay. On the other hand, at that time, being gay was seen as something evil and wrong.
The state approved Jarrett's text for 8th graders. In it, he celebrates a one-eyed, gun-toting, whiskey-drinking stagecoach driver named Charlie Parkhurst. Only on death did people discover he was a she. He says Baron von Steuben, who helped Washington Valley Forge, may have been gay. Jarrett also outs poet Walt Whitman, saying while Whitman sometimes denied his same-sex preferences in public, he was drawn to young men in parks and dance halls.
Much of this is speculation. It's not good history.
As historians, we look at evidence, and we try to draw conclusions from evidence, and we compare them. We give different perspectives.
State documents show the Education Board rejected publishers who refused to label some figures gay and forced another to insert the word lesbian when referring to astronaut Sally Ride.
These figures, who are important in American history, are important for reasons that have nothing to do with their sexuality.
According to the state instructional framework, students learn about lesbian and gay parents in 2nd grade, birth-assigned gender, and cross-dressing in 4th. Activists believe the new law celebrates the state's diversity and reduces negative stereotypes. Others worry about what California is not teaching. 40% of California students entering the state university system need remedial math and English, and only 30% will earn a bachelor's degree. Mike?
William Lajeunesse reporting from Los Angeles. There are growing concerns tonight about the dangers of Legionnaire's disease in veterans' hospitals. One facility in Illinois is dealing with multiple fatalities over the past few years. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin fills us in tonight from Quincy, Illinois.
Legionella bacteria was detected at the Illinois Veterans Home in Quincy as early as July of 2015, according to the Centers for Disease Control. That's roughly when Korean War veteran Richard French moved in. He was sick. His wife Dolores moved into independent living there to be near him. Friday, August 28th, their son Steve French heard news of a Legionnaire's disease outbreak and called.
It was a pretty quick response. A kind of a casual response saying, nope, your parents are fine. If something happens, we will give you a call. At that time, she was already dead. We found out later that she had been dead for several days.
Dolores French was one of 12 residents to die after contracting Legionella bacteria. More than 50 got sick. Emails uncovered by WBEZ Public Radio showed the state public health director was aware on August 21st the home was facing the, quote, beginning of an epidemic, but there was no public notification until August 27th. 11 families are now suing for negligence.
It looks like there was knowledge that was not shared, at least with the caregivers at the Illinois State Veterans Home, that certainly potentially could have aided in either the treatment of or the recovery of these individuals that ultimately passed away.
Legionella bacteria flourishes in old, stagnant plumbing. The state spent $6.4 million to upgrade the plumbing at the 130-year-old home. Pipes are now flushed, water is chemically treated, filtered, and heated to kill bacteria. Erica Jeffries, State Director for Veterans Affairs, declined our request for an interview. However, in June of 2016, she said, we've got the cleanest water probably in the state. But 5 more people at the home got sick that year. In July of 2016, Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner said, we're really on top of the situation. Last fall, 3 more residents tested positive for the bacteria. A Korean War veteran with a host of medical problems died. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin has said if the water can't be fixed, the home needs to be closed. Families involved in the lawsuit say they do not want to see this facility shut down. It's a job provider in a small town. It's a place where veterans can be together in their later years. However, the families say they don't want to see anyone else get sick. In Quincy, Illinois, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
Mike Tobin reporting from Quincy, Illinois. Up next, the panel on China's economy and more sanctions against North Korea. First, beyond our borders tonight, the Kremlin is hinting at possible legal repercussions for a Russian opposition leader who's calling for a boycott of the March presidential election. Yesterday, the Election Commission ruled Vladimir Putin critic Alexei Navalny is ineligible to run for president. British officials say the Royal Navy has escorted a Russian warship through the North Sea near the UK. The Navy says there's been a recent surge of Russian vessels traveling near Great Britain. Officials are warning Russian ships may cut undersea internet cables in a bid to disrupt communication and commerce. The foreign ministers of China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan are asking Taliban militants to join peace talks. The Taliban has so far refused to speak to the Afghan government, but leaders have traveled several times to other places for talks. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
North Korea has done everything wrong as an actor on the global stage that a country can do, and President Trump has used just about every lever you can use, short of starving the people of North Korea to death, to change their behavior. And so we don't have a lot of room left here to apply pressure to change their behavior.
It now needs to be followed up with diplomacy, where we get China and the United States working with the same strategy with North Korea to find a way that we can ease the tension and get North Korea to change direction.
On that note, let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics and host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM, and Michael Needham is the chief executive officer at Heritage Action for America. Welcome. Hope you guys all had a very Merry Christmas.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas.
So, Mike, thoughts on where we are with North Korea after hearing a sampling of that sound right there?
Yeah, well, you know, we've known all year. We've known for a long time there's not a lot of good options. I think it's a little bit misleading to say there's no more options for the United States to play economically. I mean, actually, the real economic options that we've had with North Korea always involve secondary sanctions. That means going after other entities that are doing business with North Koreans. The chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, has given the administration a list of 12 Chinese banks that we should be putting secondary sanctions on. I think if you really want to put true kind of economic pressure on the North Koreans, the type that we had on Iran for a long time, you're going to have to look at those secondary sanctions. We're going to have to look at Chinese banks, especially those 12 that Chairman Royce has put forward.
On some new sanctions, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin saying, quote, Treasury is targeting leaders of North Korea's ballistic missiles program as part of our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the DPRK and achieve a fully denuclearized Korean peninsula. A.B., your thoughts on this latest step from the Trump administration?
You know, the Trump administration deserves credit for getting the Chinese to do more with regards to North Korea than its predecessors. One of the things it did was convince the Chinese government to stop all transactions to their central bank with the regime. This is a lot of the things that we've seen look really effective and could be consequential, but we don't know how enforceable they are. So today, the Treasury Secretary said this is part of the goal for a denuclearized peninsula. That's not the Chinese's goal. That's not China's intention. They help us a little, but they still hold the most influence. So we're in a situation where they can take what look like dramatic steps, and many of them can be effective, but at the end, there are ways for the North Koreans to proceed with getting their hands on energy, proceeding with a nuclear program with not only the Chinese but other countries, which we can't prevent and we can't enforce.
It can also be tricky trying to figure out the intentions of the North Korean regime. Here's the White House on that idea.
How they operate is often a little mysterious. If we knew better with perfect knowledge, we would be able to address the North Korean problem with more clarity. And part of the larger strategy of increased pressure on North Koreans is to get them to change that behavior.
Tom, changing the behavior?
Well, I think Bossert and Senator Cardin, the Maryland Democrat, are both wrong on this because, as Michael suggests, we have not pushed the Chinese. This will not change until you push the Chinese, because the Chinese expectation, Senator Cardin obviously doesn't seem to get. I don't know what he's doing on the Foreign Relations Committee because it's quite basic. The Chinese want the United States in a position of relative weakness and discomfort in the region. North Korea at the moment is not such a big deal for them because they could, what's the harm if there's a war, refugees come across the border? The Chinese, as we've seen in Tiananmen and going forwards, Hong Kong, don't have a terrible disposition in terms of concern about those issues. So for the United States to, yes, I think we have to do those banking sanctions. Frankly, I think we also have to do the kind of thing that we've slightly done on counterterrorism, which is to bring down bank servers that as cutouts, mess around with them, that covert action side. And finally, on the Chinese factor as well, the Trump administration needs to really double down in terms of a force presence in the South and East China Seas. Get in the Chinese neighborhood and say, listen, in the end, we may not be able to resolve this. You may not play ball with us, but by goodness, you are going to be paying a consequence, a price tag as well as us.
There's also concern about this economic surge perhaps coming in Asia and whether the Chinese will ultimately have the biggest economy in the world. What about that, Tom?
Well, I think, you know, part of this is India is the critical node here, and the Indian government is deeply concerned about the pressure there. Prime Minister Modi, obviously pro-American, pro-business reform, the world's most populous democracy. The Trump administration should get right alongside him. Trump should go to New Delhi, quite frankly, and say, this is our anchor point. What Trump should also be doing, I think, and my accent aside, is going on Twitter and saying, Prime Minister David Cameron, the British government, close American allies who are dealing with Chinese financial entities, the Asia Investment and Infrastructure Bank, which former Prime Minister David Cameron just joined, they should not be doing that. That's poor, that's bad allyship.
Of course, we've heard the president talk a lot this year about China. Let's take a listen to this.
My administration is committed to improving our trade and business relationships with China. Both the United States and China will have a more prosperous future if we can achieve a level economic playing field. Right now, unfortunately, it is a very one-sided and unfair one.
So, A.B., the president, a former businessman, has his concerns about the Chinese economy going forward and their business practices.
Going back decades, and it's one of the strongest themes of his economic message in his campaign was going after the Chinese. He has not followed through on those threats like the steel tariffs and things he's talked about because he's in a weakened position because of North Korea. So while they should have confronted the Chinese in the South China Seas. They've let it go. A whole year's gone by where development continues apace. And they obviously have benefited on the global stage economically as a leader, a global economic leader, because of our withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So while the president talks a lot about this reciprocity and the balance that we need to counter a rising China, because of our dependence on them in the situation with North Korea, he hasn't followed through on his threats.
Michael, looking ahead to China in the new year, are you looking for a new approach from the administration or more of the same?
Well, you know, the most interesting thing actually is reading the national security strategy the administration just put out and seeing the contrast between the Chinese approach, which they call their one belt, one road approach. It's a massive, centrally planned Chinese plan for 68 countries in kind of from Europe all the way to the Pacific, versus what the United States offers, what free enterprise offers, where the administration talks about partnerships and countries coming to America, joining us in things like the Quad, which Tom mentioned, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. Voluntary relationships where we all benefit. I think that's what the future is. That's what people are looking for, not a centrally governed Chinese one belt, one road approach.
All right, we'll leave it there. Up next, should the longest serving Republican senator in history retire?
The Finance Committee and will still be chairman once reelected. That's pretty darn important stuff. It's the most powerful committee on Capitol Hill. And I think most people would say I know what I'm doing there. So, yeah, I'd like to do that. But we'll wait and see. I'll probably announce this sometime after the first of the year as to just exactly what I'm going to do.
You think Mitt Romney has a political future?
Well, I sure do. And, you know, if I didn't run, I would love to see him run in my place.
And we're back with our panel. Check out this Merry Christmas from the Salt Lake Tribune editorial page to Senator Orrin Hatch. Quote, his utter lack of integrity that rises from his unquenchable thirst for power. It would be good for Utah if Hatch finally caught the great whale of tax reform, white whale of tax reform, you know what I mean. We're to call it a career. If he doesn't, the voters should end it for him. Then Hatch took to Twitter saying, grateful for this great Christmas honor from the Salt Lake Tribune. His staff says he was being sarcastic. Mike, you surprised by this in his home state of Utah, a very conservative state?
Well, look, I mean, they make a couple of points that I think are worth taking. First of all, Senator Hatch deserves enormous credit for getting this tax bill through the Senate. It was an enormously dicey proposition with 52 senators. He did a great job. It's for the people of Utah to figure out what they think about somebody who runs for 42 years, having said he's not going to run in the future. There's another element of this also, though, which is that a number of times in the last year, the U.S. Senate agenda, the Republican agenda in the United States Senate, has come under great doubt due to the health of the oldest United States Senate we've ever had in this country. Senator Hatch is 83 years old. We have 51 senators in the United States Senate. We can't afford to be losing Republican votes. And I think an additional thing that the people of Utah are going to have to take into account, in addition to 42 years, why are we reelecting somebody to come back to Washington, is having the oldest United States Senate with such a slim margin in a divided country the best way for conservatives to get a policy.
And we have seen some health issues, and sources I talked to on the Hill say that, you know, Chairman Hatch wanted to be in the middle of this tax reform push, didn't want to make any announcement, didn't want to be a lame duck chairman. And so, A.B., what are you thinking about this from his home state and what Senator Hatch's next play might be?
Well, I wrote about this the day after Roy Moore lost. I wrote that Mitt Romney should take on Orrin Hatch. If Orrin Hatch won't step away, he should run as an independent and challenge him. In Utah Republican circles, you wait until there's an open seat. Orrin Hatch ran against an incumbent who had served 3 terms. A senator, he said it was time for him to go home because he was getting stale. There is no argument for his 8th term. Tax reform is done. He's served there for 4 decades. The polling in the state are terrible for his reelect. People want him to pack it in. And the idea that President Trump and Steve Bannon are supporting another run by Orrin Hatch after promising to purge everyone of every Republican establishment incumbent and bring in outsiders is the height of hypocrisy. Senator Hatch is now the swamp if he doesn't leave his seat.
And of course, there are reasons why the President of the United States is not particularly fond of Mitt Romney. Let's take a listen to this.
Now, Donald Trump tells us that he is very, very smart. I'm afraid that when it comes to foreign policy, he is very, very not smart. Donald Trump says he admires Vladimir Putin. There's a dark irony in his boasts of his sexual exploits during the Vietnam War. A business genius he is not. Dishonesty is Donald Trump's hallmark.
So no love lost between the president and Mitt Romney. Tom?
Well, and of course they had that Trump had his slight revenge moment at the New York Steakhouse as he was considering Mitt Romney to be the Secretary of State. But look, I think ultimately it would make the most sensible choice, obviously, for Utah Republicans, but also for the president, in the sense that I don't think Mitt Romney coming to Washington would be, number one, I think it would be a sort of shoo-in, but number two, him coming here, I think if you look at the guy, if you look at his willingness to try and forge some kind of measured compromise, the businessman mentality, if we look at Trump learning in tax reform, perhaps over Obamacare, getting something through, building a consensus, yielding on certain points. The president has evolved into that role. Well, Mitt Romney, I think, also would evolve into the role that to come to Washington and do things, he could criticize the president and would in certain points, but he wouldn't, I think, want to be the poster boy for that criticism to say the same degree that Jeff Flake has become.
Briefly, does he retire, Senator Hatch?
I think he does, yes.
AB?
I think so, too.
Michael?
I think he will, and I think we need new blood in the Republican Party. I mean, it shouldn't just come down to Orrin Hatch. Mitt Romney is a great person, but there's other people like the state auditor, John Dugall, who a lot of conservatives like, former Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who retired, now a Fox News contributor. I think it's time, if this party's going to move forward into a new era of policy, for new voices to be part of that.
All right, that'll do it for the panel. When we come back, the singing policeman.
States is sanctioning two it describes as key leaders of North Korea's unlawful weapons programs. In a statement, quote, Treasury is targeting leaders of North Korea's ballistic missile programs as part of our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the DPRK and achieve a fully denuclearized Korean peninsula. The announcement follows Friday's United Nations Security Council resolution that imposed new sanctions on North Korea, targeting its money flow, a move North Korea equated to an act of war. International reports say the Russian government is offering to mediate between the U.S. and North Korea. The State Department failed to respond to requests to comment on the offer. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said North Korea must earn its way back to the negotiating table, starting with a halt on its missile and nuclear tests. Before leaving for his holiday in South Florida, the president promised persistent pressure on Kim Jong-un.
There is much more work to do. America and its allies will take all necessary steps to achieve a denuclearization and ensure that this regime cannot threaten the world.
While his administration focuses on North Korea, the president spent the day at Trump International, playing golf with Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia, PGA Pro player Bryson DeChambeau, and former PGA Pro Dana Quigley. The administration describes this as a working vacation. On policy from the president this morning, a tweet, quote, based on the fact that the very unfair and unpopular individual mandate has been terminated as part of our tax cut bill, which essentially repeals over time Obamacare, the Democrats and Republicans will eventually come together and develop a great new health care plan. Republicans already tried to replace Obamacare, thwarted by insufficient support in their own party. The White House says the president will discuss his 2018 legislative strategy the first week in January, with House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell at Camp David. The administration says it will also push an infrastructure package. Some Democrats say they are willing to work with Republicans.
We've got an aging infrastructure with potholes and highways that aren't working and bridges that are in trouble. We need to do something together to fix our infrastructure if we're going to stay competitive as a nation.
Another quiet evening for the president on a day that involved only 3 tweets, the one on health care, one claiming that the FBI investigation into collusion with the Russian government during the 2016 campaign is tainted, and one claiming that his tax proposal will increase economic growth next year. Mike?
Rich Edson in beautiful West Palm Beach. Rich, many thanks. China could overtake the U.S. as the world's largest economy in 15 years. That's the prediction in a new report that foresees an economic explosion in Asia. Correspondent Doug McKelway looks at the numbers tonight.
China.
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 If it seems President Trump is preoccupied with China, there may be good reason. A new study by the Center for Economics and Business Research in London finds that China will overtake the U.S. as the world's leading economy by the year 2032. The White House's national security strategy, released last week, mentioned China no less than 33 times. It warned of China's multiple growing threats from military, cyber spying, currency manipulation, and intellectual property theft that is, quote, valued at hundreds of billions of dollars every year. It is an imbalance the president appears determined to fix, using both carrot.
I have been very encouraged by my conversations with President Xi.
And stick.
Our rivals are tough. They're tenacious and committed to the long term. But so are we.
But predictions of long-term economic growth can be notoriously unreliable, and China's economy has some dangerous structural flaws. During the 2008 recession, other countries let markets adjust with lower home prices, layoffs, lower wages, and lower productivity. China did not make those corrections, opting instead for a more hands-on response.
And so they embarked on a stimulus program, which they've been continuing since that time. And as they've done that, the imbalances in the Chinese economy have gotten larger and larger. And now they are so large that I don't think that they can be solved without a systemic crisis.
China's state-owned businesses and enterprises are saddled with huge debt, equal to 90% of the country's gross domestic product, a problem China is deeply aware of. In August, Bloomberg reported that China's finance ministry ordered, quote, state-owned companies improve returns and make sure projects are financially viable before decisions are made. Bloomberg noted, quote, that the government feels the need to spell out such obvious goals tells you the depth of the problem.
This is one of those things that we're going to wake up one morning and say, oh my God, how did that happen?
If such a crash does occur, it hardly precludes China from lashing out at the West and, in fact, may encourage it. That's one of the reasons the Trump administration wants to bolster its military and economic defenses against China. Mike?
Doug McKelway here in Washington. Doug, thanks very much. Syrian rebels and opposition groups are rejecting Russia's proposed peace talks to end that country's civil war. They accuse Moscow of failing to pressure its ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, to end the conflict. This comes as the ISIS terror group fights for its existence in the face of U.S. efforts to exterminate it. Lucas Tomlin has more tonight from the Pentagon.
The U.S. military says ISIS has lost 98% of the territory it once held. Half those losses coming since President Trump took office. Critics say the Obama administration micromanaged the war.
The rules of engagement under the Obama administration were onerous. I mean, what are we doing having individual target determination being conducted in the White House, which took, in some cases, weeks and weeks?
But a former senior director for counterterrorism in the Obama White House pushed back on any criticism the former president didn't do enough to crush ISIS. Joshua Geltzer is the author of a book on al-Qaeda.
This was a top priority. There was a recognition that safe haven for terrorist groups can mean terrorist plots that extend not just into the region, but into Europe or conceivably into the United States.
Today, the latest American intelligence estimate says less than 1,000 ISIS fighters remain in Iraq and Syria, down from a peak of up to 45,000 just 2 years ago. U.S. officials credit nearly 30,000 U.S.-led coalition airstrikes and regional partners on the ground, killing more than 70,000 jihadists, but a few thousand have returned home. The remaining ISIS strongholds concentrated in a small area along the Syria and Iraq border. ISIS at one point controlled an area the size of Ohio. While ISIS has been largely defeated, it continues to call on followers around the world to conduct terror attacks during the holidays, with a new message sprouting up just today. And a suicide attack in Kabul on Christmas, with ISIS claiming responsibility. It's part of the terror group's effort to expand its influence into Africa and Afghanistan. The U.S. ambassador to the anti-ISIS coalition warns not to expect a complete defeat anytime soon.
ISIS became a brand, and a lot of pre-existing terrorist groups, you've seen this in the Sinai, for example, start to raise the flag of ISIS, mainly to recruit foreign fighters and other things.
But the former head of U.S. Air Force intelligence thinks the war should have ended much sooner.
What the Trump administration did was allow execution decisions to be made in accordance with the guidance that he provided. We could have accomplished our objectives through the use of overwhelming power in 3 months, not 3 years.
General Deptula says ISIS-held oil supplies were not targeted for 15 months beginning in 2014 for fear of collateral damage, giving the terror group an additional $15 million in revenue. Mike?
Lucas Tomlinson live at the Pentagon. Lucas, thanks a lot. The attorneys general in 8 eastern seaboard states are suing the Environmental Protection Agency over air pollution that blows in from upwind states. Democratic New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman says the lawsuit was filed to force President Trump's administration to take action to ensure upwind states control pollution. The EPA is not commenting. 3 U.S. cities are suing the Pentagon for failing to comply with enforcement of the national background check system for gun purchases. This comes in the wake of a deadly gun incident at a Texas church. The shooter was a former Air Force service member who should not have been allowed to purchase a gun because of a past criminal record. The cities filing suit are San Francisco, Philadelphia, and New York. The Pentagon is refusing comment. We are awaiting word any day now on whether the Justice Department will ask the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene and allow the administration to enforce its ban on accepting transgender military recruits starting January 1st. Let's talk about that and other legal issues with George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. He joins us tonight from Chicago. Good evening, Professor. Nice to see you.
Hi, Mike.
What's your thinking on where this transgender ban is heading at this stage, sir?
Well, this is as interesting an area as constitutional law can provide. The status of transnational citizens has been hotly debated because it is not discrimination based on religion or things that normally trigger what's called this strict scrutiny or the highest level of review. And yet courts have found that by singling out transnational military personnel and recruitees, the government was engaging in the violation of equal protection guarantees. It's a new question. As it stands, the Supreme Court has never given special protection for this group. And so we could be having a major decision coming out of the Supreme Court if it accepts this case.
If it doesn't accept the case, where are we heading from there, sir?
Well, the administration can simply take its losses, but that would mean that in January, the policy the president wanted would not be fully implemented. My guess is that they will carry out the president's wishes and challenge this and try to push it before the Supreme Court as much as they can. But regardless of that commitment, the court could decline it. You know, there is a sort of intra-court politics that goes on. Justices count heads. When they vote whether to accept a case, they often hold back that vote if they think they might not win.
Another huge legal issue from the first year of the Trump administration, of course, is the travel ban. Here's the White House from Fox News Sunday the other day.
The people here from Haiti are here from an earthquake that happened roughly 10 years ago under temporary protective status. We have tens of thousands of people still in our country from Honduras and from Nicaragua from a hurricane that happened in 1999. Tens of thousands of people under temporary protective status. Congress needs to change these laws as opposed to continual 6-month extensions of people that are here from 10 and 20 years ago.
So, Professor, the travel ban at this stage, where are we heading on that front?
Well, this has been as convoluted a path as you can get in terms of constitutional cases. This is sort of third time on a match, which is not normally that lucky. The first 2 versions of the travel ban essentially ended before the Supreme Court could review them. The first ban, which was, I think, poorly written, but I still think the law supported the president, was replaced by a much better written second ban. That made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and some of us were betting on the president winning there, but then that expired and the third ban was issued. Now, what's interesting is the Supreme Court recently lifted an injunction imposed by these lower courts and allowed the ban to be fully implemented without any of the prior limitations. That, to many of us, constituted an indication that the court favored the president. And the court also made it clear they wanted a ruling on this, which indicated that they will accept it when the government or the other party asks for the review. In this case, it'll be the government.
Another major issue that is out there, of course, is the Russia probe ongoing. Some lawmakers on Capitol Hill are worried that President Trump may try to fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Here's the Democrat view on that front.
This president does not respect the rule of law, nor does he respect the various agencies, that are charged with the responsibility of protecting us in terms of law enforcement. If you think about the pattern over the last year, he is constantly putting down the very institutions that keep us free.
Of course, the president's legal team, Jay Sekulow, talking to the Wall Street Journal on Monday, saying, quote, "I know we collectively, the lawyers, are looking forward to an expeditious wrapping up of this matter." Professor Turley, are we getting close, or is this going to drag on for much of the rest of this term?
Well, using the word expeditious and special counsel or independent counsel in the same sentence is usually a mistake. These investigations go on for a long time. He has 2 pending cases, a plea bargain that still we haven't seen what was delivered. Those 2 cases alone would push this investigation for a year or so. But what the White House may be talking about is they expect some conclusion on the Russian collusion issue. What I think the White House can take a certain degree of comfort in is that they're finishing this year with no indictment that's directly related to the campaign or to the current Trump White House. These are all matters that were largely focused on other issues. That has to be good news. Many people in Washington hoped that they would have stockings filled with subpoenas by Christmas. That hasn't happened. And so there is some reason for them to be optimistic, but I would never put a timeline on it, and I would never bet on what's coming down the pike.
Professor Jonathan Turley, live in Chicago, thanks so much for your time and your analysis.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Stocks were down. The Dow lost 8. The S&P 500 dropped 3. NASDAQ fell 24. Today, of course, marked the beginning of another big retail sales period. The holiday gift return season. Sellers are hoping for a continuation of the big numbers they have been seeing since last month. Correspondent Anita Vogel takes a look.
Whether online or actually waiting in a line, there's no question shopping was back in vogue this holiday season.
I just felt more excited about shopping, and I usually don't go out and shop. No, never. I usually don't go out and shop, but this year I just felt more positive.
I like stores. I prefer buying in stores because I like to see it and touch it and feel it.
Retailers got their wish as sales grew at a faster pace than they have in the last 5 years. According to the National Retail Federation, 7 years ago, sales were at $528 billion. In 2017, the estimate for this holiday season is $682 billion. A spokesperson from MasterCard says overall, this was a big win for retail this year. Experts point to 3 key factors that led to increased sales. First, good shopping weather across the country. Next, a national low unemployment rate of just over 4%. And that led to the third thing on the list, consumer confidence.
They feel more secure that they're going to be able to keep their jobs, and so now they're spending some of that money that may have been holding back a little bit. So I think a lot of people spend a little bit more this Christmas. That's one of the reasons that you're seeing the numbers the way that you are.
But it's not the rosiest picture for the old brick-and-mortar stores. Some of the big chain stores that used to anchor shopping malls are shuttering locations across the country. Stores like Macy's, JCPenney's, and Sears have all had to cut back.
I think any business, whether you're small or large, needs to be very efficient and cost-effective. And those models are not working as well anymore.
But there is a silver lining for those old brick-and-mortar stores. Surveys show shoppers tend to spend more money in person than online. And next year, businesses across America will be getting what the president calls a Christmas present, a huge cut in the corporate tax rate. Mike?
Anita Vogel in Los Angeles. Anita, thanks a lot. When we come back, what some believe is a commercial airline pilot shortage. What is